Today's video is going to be a taste test to see if we can taste the difference between the cheapest and the most expensive products in a specific range or category. Today's video is an idea that came out of my budget or cooking challenge series, where I bought some really cheap jam, bought some really cheap Sainsbury's strawberry jam. As always on those videos, people said, wow, your food is cheap. There's a lot of complicating factors in that, which I'm not going to talk about today, but one of them is that I'm always selecting the very lowest priced item. So I'm always scraping the bottom of the barrel, which I think does introduce a tiny bit of bias in the perception. So I'm not going to talk at length about comparative prices between food in the UK and other places in the world and cost of living and so on. That's a huge, huge topic, and it's not today's video. Today's video is going to be taste testing the cheapest and the most expensive versions of a thing. And this time it's going to be raspberry jam and honey. So before we actually look at all of that, jam and jelly and conserve and preserve and confiture and compote and all of those terms are a big, big minefield. There is a legal definition for anything that's going to be called jam or jelly, and it is this. So for something that's to be called jam, it has to use at least 350 grams of fruit or fruit pulp or puree to make 1 kilo of finished product for most common fruits. There are some exceptions for other fruits, I'll put them on the screen, but it has to have a certain proportion of fruit in there. There is a sugar content thing as well, which I'll get to in a minute. There is a thing called extra jam, and actually that's what this one is. It's labelled conserve on the front, but it actually says it's an extra jam. So extra jam has to use at least 450 grams of fruit or fruit pulp per 1 kilo of finished product. And for extra jam, there are some mixtures that are forbidden. You can't mix certain combinations of things, or can't mix in certain things to fill it in. And again, there are lower proportions of fruit for certain listed exceptions. So that's jam. Jelly is the same. There are categories called jelly and extra jelly, and they are the same in terms of weight of fruit per finished product. So 350 grams for jelly, 450 grams for extra jelly, but jelly must be made from the juice or aqueous extract of the fruit. It's not just the fruit with the pips strained out, it has to be a liquid extract of the fruit. So traditionally that would be strained using a jelly bag, and it would be left to drip overnight, and it'd be the clear juice or the clear extract of the fruit, and you would set that with sugar. And traditionally, although this is not a legal definition, a jelly would be a light set and it would be crystal clear. You know, it would have a colour, but it would be crystal clear. You'd be able to read text through the jar. So there's also a sugar content requirement. Jams and jellies must contain no less than 60% soluble dry matter, which in context means sugar or sugars, which can either be naturally added or it can come from the fruit. And they check that with a refractometer, but it needs to be 60% sugar in the finished product. For reduced sugar jams, that can be between 25 and 50% inclusive. The percentages don't exactly add up. So, you know, you might be thinking, well, how can this be 450 grams of fruit per kilo, but also 60% sugar? Well, partly because some of that fruit is sugar, but also partly because it's boiled in the production, and so that drives off water and concentrates the sugar. So the percentages don't appear to add up, but they do. So seedless raspberry jam is jam, not jelly, by legal definition in the UK anyway. The document, the legal definition document, I've waded through it to find the kind of relevant bits. Anyway, so there are a bunch of dodges that manufacturers use to get around these terms jam and jelly. And they're not dodging it in the way that you might think they would be. You might think that manufacturers would be using the terms other than jam or jelly in order to put out a lower quality product. Typically it's the opposite, actually. So if you want to use more fruit than 450 grams per kilo, probably means the sugar content in the finished product is going to be less than 60%. They might still be lovely and sweet, or actually they might be sour, and that might be their thing. But they can't be called jam if they've got less than 60% sugar in them in the finished product. And so you will sometimes see other terms like preserve or conserve, which don't have any legal definition in the UK. So anyway, I went and had a look at all the different jams and jellies, and it is quite difficult to find the top and bottom product. It was certainly difficult to find the top product. The cheapest product was this one, Sainsbury's raspberry jam, 89 pence for this 454 gram jar, which is what you used to call a pound, and that works out at 20 pence per 100 grams. I thought I'd pick one from the middle of the road as well, sort of mid-range, and this is Hartley's raspberry seedless, so again a seedless raspberry jam, And this one was £1.50, but it's only a 300-gram jar. So that's 50 pence per 100 grams. And then up the top, this was the most expensive per 100 grams that I could find that was a jam. There were some potential competitors that were conserves. There were actually some things there that didn't even say what they were. They just said juicy raspberry or whatever, and they didn't actually specify what kind of a product they were. So I suppose that's valid as well. If you don't want to call it a jam, then you don't have to. Anyway, so this is Tiptree Wilkin & Sons Raspberry Seedless Conserve, which is actually an extra jam. And this was £3.80 for a 340-gram jar. So that's £1.12 per 100 grams. So this is roughly 5 or 6 times more expensive than this. And this is somewhere in the middle. So that's my jams. What we're gonna do is I'll get Jenny to open these and put them on some toast. I will blindfold myself and we'll do a blind taste testing. For that reason, I shan't open them and look at the consistency and everything of them until after that taste test, because getting a view of the texture might skew the test. So I shan't open these until after the taste test. Well, Jenny will open them. So I'm also going to look at honey, but to save you all waiting, let's do the blind taste test of the jam right now. Okay, so here is the plan. Jenny's going to assist me with the blind taste testing. So we're going to have 3 slices of toast. We've got 3 plates labelled A, B and C. We've got 3 jars of jam not yet labelled. So Jenny's going to write A, B and C in no particular order on those jars of jam, and then put the jam onto the corresponding toast on the plate, A, B and C, cut it into quarters and deposit it in front of me in no particular order for tasting. So I won't know which order I'm tasting these in. Right, so I am awaiting Jenny. My blindfold today is just going to be this hat, which, well, that's sufficient, I think. Yeah, I can't see anything, at least not enough to read anything. So, yeah, there's my 3 dots. My plates are going to be here. I also have a glass of water here to serve as a palate cleanser. Hopefully I'll better reach that and figure out where that is without knocking it over. Okay, I think I can hear her coming, so blindfold on. Okay, Eva, be quiet. 3 dots in front of me here on the table.
Doesn't matter which order.
No particular order, actually, so, yeah. Okay, yeah, I can find them. Thank you very much. Okay, so starting with this one here. Just make sure I don't get it on my hat. Okay, so nice balanced raspberry flavour. Kind of, I can taste the acidity of the raspberries. I can taste the sweetness of the jam. I can taste the aroma of the raspberries as well. So that's good. That's definitely, I would, at the very least, I can say I would definitely know I'm eating raspberry jam. There's no doubt about what fruit I'm eating there. Okay, second one now. That one seems to have a bit more raspberry in it, a bit more raspberry flavour. Now, just in case I'm getting some sort of cumulative effect here, I'll taste them this way, then I'll taste them that way. I might jump in and out to just see what I can get. But yeah, I think I'm getting more raspberry aroma from this one, and just a really a bit more of a berry profile to it. Still nice balance of sweetness and acidity. Again, definitely know that I'm eating raspberry jam. The third one here. That one. Okay, it's jam. I'm going to have another little taste of that. Yeah, it's jam. The raspberry flavour is not tremendously prominent in that one. So it tastes sweet and fruity and berryish, and the balance is good. The balance of acidity and sweetness is good. It's a bit softer, I would say. A bit softer texture than the other two. A bit more syrupy, perhaps. But yeah, the raspberry aroma is definitely further back on that one. So now I'm just going to do a palate cleanse. And I'll taste them in the opposite order. So this one here, I'll take a different slice. There's a different slice, yeah. Okay, right, so. Yep. Okay, did get maybe a little bit more of the raspberry that time. Yeah, I think, I think I would, I still know that's raspberry. but it's not as intense as, well, the middle one I think was the most intense raspberry. So, where's my water glass gone? Okay, so the middle one we'll taste again. Is that a different slice? Yes, I think so. Yeah, definitely lots of raspberry there. Lots of the kind of that lovely aroma of raspberry, that kind of fruity perfume of raspberry in that middle one. Okay, and then this one here. Yeah. That one actually is interesting because that one is more jammy. So that has a more cooked raspberry flavour. So yeah, that's more jammy than the other two. So that one tastes like a traditional sort of boiled jam flavour. This one's just very light and syrupy with a mild fruity flavour. This one has got a lot of raspberry. This one's got a really strong profile of raspberry. So my guess is, and I'm going to rearrange these then. So my guess is that that's the middle one. That's the cheap one. And that's the expensive one. So I think cheap, middle, top. I'm just going to confirm my proprioception is correct here. Yeah, so that's the one that's got a lot of raspberry. That one's got a little bit more acidity and a more jammy flavour. And then this one, whilst it's still nice, it's a bit more delicate texture, not so obviously raspberry. So overall, all actually three quite nice. But yeah, my preference is definitely that one. That's my favourite. And I think that might be the most expensive one as well, because that's the one that tastes most of raspberries. So that's my judgment. I can take the hat off now. I'm just going to jam off my fingers. Right, I can take the hat off now. Wow, that's bright. And so, yeah, BCA. Right, I'm going to go and get the jars of jam that Jenny's labelled now, and we'll see if I got it right. All right, here are the jars. So, B, which is the first one, is the Sainsbury's seedless raspberry jam. C, which is the one I put in the middle, is the Hartley's raspberry seedless. And A is the Tiptree raspberry seedless. So I think I judged that correctly, which is interesting, isn't it? So there definitely is a difference between these. Do you know what? It's not massive. I'd not say this is 5 or 6 times better than that. It is better, in my subjective opinion. It is more raspberry flavour. Some of that will just be because that's an extra jam. It's got more raspberries in it. So this one, the Sainsbury's, the cheap one, is just kind of jam. This one, it's a little bit more raspberry flavour in it. And this one, definite kind of very prominent raspberry flavour profile. So that is interesting. Now here's the question though. So is it worth spending 5 or 6 times as much money on that as it is on that? And I would say that depends. That depends on whether you're going to really taste the jam. So if you're going to use that in a recipe, jam tarts or something like that, probably not worth buying the expensive one for cooking. So maybe in a cake as well, where there's a lot of other flavours going on. I mean, I've got to say that raspberry aroma is very nice flavour. And so, you know, when it's present, it's very welcome. Is it worth spending 5 or 6 times as much money? I don't know. I don't know how to judge that, actually. And I would say probably it is worth not buying the cheapest one. It's probably worth going up a little bit from the bottom until you get one that's got some flavour. So I think the cheapest one was just a bit lacking in flavour. A bit lacking in the very thing that is supposed to make it distinctive, which is the raspberry flavour. So the cheap one, it's not horrible. What might be interesting is to explore the gap between these two and look at some. Although there aren't many other price options in between. There's another Sainsbury's one which is a bit more premium. There might be some other brands that are in the middle. So it might be worth just spending a little bit extra and not getting the very cheapest one. So maybe we'll explore that in another video, or maybe a random stuff. As far as this gap, is it worth going from here to here? I think it is, but I think I would have to regard that as a treat. I mean, maybe if I was going to have guests around and they'd be here for breakfast, I might splash out and give them something really nice. If it's my birthday and I fancy a special treat, again, I think it might be worth splashing out. This is definitely a much tastier jam than the others. There is a difference. I mean, that is the conclusion here, is there is definitely a perceptible difference between these three. Just to compare, if we put the three alongside each other in the right order, what's interesting is the Hartley's one in the middle is the palest colour, but that might just be down to the variety of the raspberries that they've added in there. Raspberries are not all the same colour. So that was interesting and I think conclusive in some sense. Anyway, there's a difference. You can taste the difference. Whether or not that's worth the money, a difficult thing to judge, but make your own decisions there. Okay, over here. Time for the toast tax. You're such a gentle baby. Good girl. I know, just plain toast. It wasn't very exciting, was it? That's it. Good girl. Off you go. Now, I did also say I'm going to do the same test for honey. And honey was even more difficult because up at the top end of the honey, there is Manuka honey, which is very, very expensive. But I excluded that from the range because I feel like people are buying Manuka honey for a different reason than they're buying other kinds of honey. Manuka honey's got purported health benefits, which again, I'm not going to get into here or examine, but tiny little jars, very expensive. And I feel like people are buying that for a different reason. They might still be eating it in the same way, but their motivation, I think, for buying that is probably different. So I decided to set the top of the range just below the Manuka honey. So let's have a look at what we got. So this is Stamford Street Clear Honey, 340 grams. This cost 75 pence, so 22 pence per 100 grams. This is little over apiary. Again, it's a 340 gram jar. Cost £4.20. Again, a clear honey, but actually not the same. I'll do a tip test in a minute on these, but you can basically see when I tip them over, the bubble rises to the top quicker in this one than it does in this one, which indicates that this has got a slightly higher water content than that one, probably. The viscosity of the honey is probably down to the water content, so this one's probably a little bit more watery than this one. This was £4.20, this little over honey, and that works out at £1.24 per 100 grams. And then this one, Rouse Scottish Heather Honey, was £6 for this jar, for 225 grams, so a smaller jar compared to the other two. So that works out at £2.67 per 100 grams. This is a kind of set honey, so it's not going to do the bubble test. And when I come to do the taste test, I'll put it on hot toast, or get Jenny to put it on hot toast for me so that hopefully the texture doesn't give that one away. So those are the honeys, and I feel like I need to say at this point, because there's bound to be people furiously typing in the comments already about how all honey is fake. Internet, can we just try nuance for a change? There's this thing about fake honey. So fake honey definitely exists in the world. People do make counterfeit honey and sell it as real honey, and it's passed off, and it's fake honey is sold as real honey. Certainly here in the UK, I don't believe that problem is as big as it is in some other places in the world. And so UK produced honey, I'm certain there are probably some cases where it does get faked and sugar syrup is used instead of real honey. I don't believe the problem is as widespread as all honey is fake in the UK. And certainly I don't think when we get to things like this, this is heather honey. Anyway, so now what there will be is people keeping their hives stocked by feeding the bees just plain sugar syrup. So just getting white sugar, diluting it in water and feeding the bees with that, and letting the bees take that back to the hive and make honey from that might well be a thing. I mean, I'm sure that happens all over the place. That's how you keep your bees alive if there's a shortage of flowers, or if the weather is too bad, or to get them through the winter. And so, I mean, it's possible that some of these lower grade honeys might well be blends that have taken in cheaper and more mass-produced honey, and honey that's been perhaps raised using methods like that, which guarantee a higher yield than just sitting the hives out in the heather and letting the bees do their thing. So just checking the small print on these jars, and one thing I will say is if I'm going to entertain any suspicion about this honey being adulterated, I think that suspicion would fall upon this product here, Stamford Street, which is Sainsbury's own brand, Clear Honey. Because if you look at the small print here, it says packed in the UK for Sainsbury's, and then the address of Sainsbury's head office, using honey from China. Now, This is not a China thing. This is not a xenophobia thing. Although I would be an idiot if I didn't acknowledge the fact that China has been host to some very egregious food adulteration problems. But that aside, the reason I would be a bit suspicious about this one is just because there are more steps in the supply chain, and there are more interfaces and more handing off of responsibility. So whereas this one, this is Rouse, this is obviously, don't be fooled by the fact that there are pretty flowers on the label, but this is sourced in the UK, it's packed in the UK. All of the supply chain for this happens within the UK. That could still be interfered with, but all of this happens under the umbrella of concern of the same food agency, and there are quite strict regulations about this. So these guys have got more to lose from messing it up than these guys have, because Sainsbury's will have a contract with some supplier who's delivering great big drums of honey into a packing plant, and that's being decanted into jars. And I'm just guessing here, but Sainsbury's contract with that supplier will probably delegate the responsibility for purity and food standards to that supplier. So, if this did turn out to be fake honey, Sainsbury's would be somewhat insulated from the repercussions of that. Whereas these guys have got more to lose. They have more accountability. Like I say, my suspicion, if there is going to be any, will fall with this product here. But my suspicion that it's not real honey is not significant enough to worry about not eating this because it might be poisonous or something. There are other standards in terms of food safety which you absolutely can't wriggle out of just by contractually delegating those responsibilities to someone else. Anyway, those are the honeys. Now it's time for the taste test. Okay, so second verse, same as the first. Yeah, except this time the honey is labelled X, Y and Z, just so you can be assured that I washed the plates up in between. There is something to say, though, about the spectrum of honey in this tasting. So whereas the previous one, there was raspberry jam and there was raspberry jam, this one goes from just honey up to heather honey or orange blossom honey or lavender honey or something like that. So it might seem like it's a little bit unfair to compare those two different types of honey, because at the bottom end of the price scale, you've just got honey. It might say runny honey or smooth honey or set honey or whatever. And at the top end of the scale, it's very varietal and artisanal and fancy. And it might seem like, you can't really compare those two things because they're not the same thing. Except that is the spectrum of availability of honey. That as you go up, it becomes more and more specific, more and more varietal, more and more fancy. And so you can't go to the top end and just buy honey. It doesn't exist there. So although that comparison might seem unfair, it's the only comparison we can make. On reflection, it might be that for that reason I should have included Manuka honey, but I am loath to drop 20 quid on a jar of honey. Okay, I can hear movement now, so on with the blindfold again. Okay, so as before, no particular order, whatever.
Right, it's just there.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's start over here again, as we did before. There's going to be sticky fingers here, so... Okay. Quite fragrant and floral, that one. Not overly sweet, actually, for honey, but a definite kind of floral aroma to that one. Not, I would say, a distinctively honey aroma, but flowery. Okay. Really just sweet. That's the only thing I get from that, is that's just sweet. Let me just try that again. Yeah, honestly, that could just be syrup. Very little in the way of any actual honey flavour or fragrance there. Okay. And number 3. That's difficult, because that's quite similar to that one. There's, again, not a huge amount of honey flavour there. Like honey tastes like honey. Well, that was interesting and tricky. because these two are quite alike. This one's distinctive and got a real floral punch to it. These two are kind of just sweet. Okay, well, I'm going to go back the other way now. I have a little palate cleanse. See if we can figure out what this one's about. Okay, a little bit more honey rather than syrup. Tasting that a second time. More of a sort of caramel note in this one. A little bit like golden syrup. And then this one. Wow. Yeah, this one, wow. Really, really herbal and floral and aromatic. There's the honey aroma that you get, just which is the smell of bees and beeswax and beehives, but also the flowers. So there's also a definite herby flower smell in there. In fact, if I had to guess, if I didn't know that one of these was heather honey, I might say that that was like thyme honey or something herbal like rosemary honey or something. It's got that kind of wild flower, wild herb smell to it. So I think we are looking at, that's the cheap one, that's the middle one, that's the expensive one. That's what I think. These two I'm not 100% sure about because they are quite similar and both of them are kind of just sweet without really being much of a punchy honey flavour. But that one tastes a bit more like caramel, that one tastes a bit more like honey. I might just go and taste these two again. Okay, yeah, I'm going to leave that as it is. I'm very confident that is the expensive one. I'm not very confident I've got these two the right way round. But to me, that one is the one that has less of a honey flavour. That's the one that's got slightly more. But there's not a lot in it. Okay, time to go and take... Wow, that is bright. Let's go and get the jars and see how we did. Okay, well, that's interesting. Now, Honey X, which I wasn't in any doubt about, is the Rouse Scottish Heather honey. Definitely can't mistake that one at all. But these two, I got the wrong way around. So that's the cheap one. That's the mid-range one. So those two I got the wrong way around. So little over apiary. I'm really sorry. I can't really tell the difference between your clear honey and the really cheap stuff. That could just be my dull middle-aged palate. Some of this is probably just because clear honey is often a bit more of a purified sort of filtered product than set honey or unfiltered honey. They might be filtering this to get every little bit of wax out of it, and clear honey like that obviously is like that for a reason. Whereas this stuff, because they didn't intend that to be runny in the jar, they may not have done so much filtering there. But I do think the flowers come through on that. The heather honey, it's interesting, I'm not tasting heather. You know, we go out walking on the heaths quite a lot and I know what heather smells like. I'm not tasting heather, I'm tasting herbs. So that was interesting because it seems like there isn't any aesthetic reason to choose expensive clear honey versus cheap clear honey. There might well be a food purity reason to choose one over the other. Like I say, suspicious about this. Not so suspicious about that. It looks like there isn't much of a reason to go and shop around in the clear honey section. You might as well just get a clear honey that's got the right price point for you and one that you feel reasonably confident is actually honey. I mean, or just have golden syrup, because after all, honey is just really sugar syrup. There are lots of health claims about honey, but by and large, it's just sugar syrup. It's just fructose glucose syrup that's been made by bees instead of machines. There is an enormous aesthetic gap here between the mid-range and the expensive, and I suppose whether or not you think that's worth the money is whether you want to taste those things in honey, whether you just want honey to be sweet or whether you want honey to be complex. This definitely is complex, and for me that's a real treat. You can taste the flowers in there. You can taste the kind of wilderness in there. But yeah, those two, much of a muchness flavour-wise. But, you know, there might be other reasons to choose one over the other. Budget, or, you know, this is organic wildflower honey. This is supporting local beekeepers. This is a product. Again, these are decisions that individuals need to make for themselves. I'm definitely not letting this go to waste. That's so good. Reminds me of the honey I had in Spain, actually, where they just set the beehives out in the mountains and let them go and find rosemary and thyme and all of the wildflowers that have got a bit of a resinous sort of nature to them. And because those plants are growing in harsh conditions, it seems almost like those wildflowers work a lot harder to produce nectar that's got some character to it. So there we go. We've done a bit of taste testing of products across a spectrum within a category. Like I say, I think this is something to think about and make your own decisions about, because there are different reasons for this, and people have different tastes as well. There are going to be people for whom this honey is not nice because it's got such a distinctive floral flavour to it, and there are going to be people who just wanted something sweet. So make your own decisions, definitely, and try and make them informed decisions, I suppose, is the takeaway from this video. So I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.